Hello, it's me, Gleb Alexandrov. This video is for you if you love the Ajax look in Blender, the way this view transform desaturates the highlights at the higher exposures and keeps the colors rich and vibrant at the lower levels. If you like this type of look, inspired by how real film emulsion reacts to light, in this tutorial we'll have a look at how to set it up in Resolve, in both the free and studio versions of Resolve using various methods. This video is also for you if you want to learn about some other pretty cool free DRTs like Ajax Kraken, to name a few, or Ajax the Resolve version, which is slightly different from what we have in Blender, or OpenDRT and other freely available view transforms that you probably haven't heard about. And if so, chances are you're missing out big time. That being said, let's focus on setting up Ajax first though. A quick reminder, this Blender to Resolve project is freemium, or based on your donations. So if you want to unlock the power of the professional color grading workflow, download the full course on Creative Shrimp Gumroad. And feel free to donate any amount that you see on screen, starting at just 0 and going shrimps and unicorns. Or just a little pile of anyway. First of all, why Ajax? What is so special about it? Why do we want to have it in Resolve? Ajax is a view transform or display rendering transform, DRT in short, by Troy Sobotka and Eerie Cho. It takes inspiration from the core behaviors of photographic film, namely the chromaticity attenuation rate, or simply speaking, desaturation of colors in higher exposures. It is a surprisingly simple behavior that Ajax borrows from a traditional photography, the higher exposure, the lower colorfulness, and vice versa. It is surprisingly simple, yet together with some other idiosyncratic things like shifting the hues along the luminance direction and so on, it just makes Ajax a really solid image formation tool. Ajax really shines when it comes to extreme use cases, like the laser-like red lights, flames, that sort of stuff. Compared to Filmic, for instance, which is another awesome view transform originated in Blender, Ajax renders such extreme color mixtures in a better way, arguably, due to that advanced saturation roll-off. When it comes to rendering a pure blue light, it also shows, Ajax a surprising resilience to clipping or oversaturation. Generally speaking, it's a solid view transform that is a good basis for picture formation, especially if your style leans towards photorealism, where the filmic attenuation of the brighter tones makes sense from the artistic perspective. Okay, the first way to set up Ajax in Resolve is OCIO, or Open Color Input Output. Here I have a source EXR clip rendered in Blender, or actually it's just one frame, never mind, it could have been a sequence. Naturally, a non-color managed preview looks truly broken, like it should, that's okay. What I'm going to do is open the project settings first, then go color management right away. To be clear, we won't be managing colors from within this panel by setting it to DaVinci Color Managed and so on. The only thing I'll do here is make sure that the resize filter is changed from sharper to bilinear or bicubic. That will ensure there is no nasty artifacts around the contrasty edges on scaling the EXR image. Okay, the most straightforward way to access the OCIO functionality in Resolve is via Resolve's Fusion, which is this icon at the bottom. I don't think we need to see the clip's thumbnail, so I'll close this menu. But we do need to see the nodes. Where are they, by the way? Okay. I will hit Shift Space to bring up the search bar, and we'll type in OCIO and go for OCIO Color Space. Cool. What can be done now is this. Basically, we need to point it to the OCIO configuration file. Where to find it? For instance, in your Blender installation folder. It'll be like the Blender folder, then the version, data files, color management, and finally there should be a config.ocio file there. That's the one! Now we should be able to see all the inputs and outputs that the Blender configuration has. Here in Resolve, like the input in case we used EXRs must be linear Rec 709 of course, as that's how all EXRs are encoded by pretty much all software. Okay. And in the outputs, and that's the best part, we'll be able to find all the cool stuff like Filmic, AGX and whatnot. Here I'll go for AGX base sRGB, which should make it match the Blender's AGX look perfectly. And that's pretty much it for the OSIO method. That was easy, right? To prove it matches the Blender's AGX indeed, I'm gonna open Blender, then the image editor, and load up some EXR there. It would also look miserable by default. Then in the right toolbar, upon activating View as Render, it should color manage it correctly. With the AGX View Transform applied, I mean. Let's check how it reacts to changing the exposure to. Then of course it has a bunch of contrast levels that the OCIO implementation doesn't have, but nevertheless the basic contrast level should do for now. Most importantly though, the AGX look should line up perfectly across this software, across Blender and Resolve. The color management police in the background again. When it comes to Fusion and OSIO in Resolve though, unfortunately, when using Fusion we are more or less constrained in terms of what color grading tools we can use. Of course we can still adjust the exposure with, let's say, the color gain node by locking RGB values and simply adjusting the gain. That will match the way the exposure slider works in Blender, pretty much. Indeed, we can see how colors get withered out at the higher tonality and get more vivid at the lower end. That's how it should be. Unfortunately, using Fusion, you are pretty much locked out of all the color adjustments of the main color tab of Resolve. And that's of course a bummer, a deal breaker even. Of course, there are some simple color grading tools in Fusion, like this color corrector. But nothing really resembling the industry standard colorists toolset found in the color tab. So we will take a look at what else we can do so that we can get access to all the good colorist stuff in Resolve. The more robust method of implementing AGX View Transform in Resolve is via using DCTL plugins, which are only available in the paid version or the studio version. There will be more free methods later on in this video though. There are the good alternatives to using DCTL, so feel free to skip to that part if you have a free version. Alright, to use DCTLs, we need to dive in the Color tab once again. Not Fusion, but this Color window over there. To use DCTLs, we need to find the DCTL effects in the Effects tab. Over there. Naturally, we should have this Effects tab open. So we need to drag and drop it onto a corrector node, which is there by default. Then we'll see this drop-down menu, which will be empty by default. That said, I have already installed some stuff in there, so mine isn't empty. To install DCTLs, what we can do is, for example, download the AGX for Resolve by Jed Smith, Juan Pablo Zambrano, and Troy Sobotka, that DCTL. You can find it on GitHub, it's free. What we need to grab is these two files, the DCTL and the other one. We can do it by pressing code, then download zip. And then it's a matter of locating the DCTL folder by opening up the loot tab here, then right-click on any folder to open file location. Then we can create a folder there called AGX or something and put these files in there. I've already done that. Upon doing that, we should be able to see the newly added camera AGX DCTL in the list of the available DCTLs. Don't worry if the preview looks wrong on selecting it. We will fix it in a moment. So if the preview looks wrong, it's because this DCTL expects certain inputs, ARRI wide gamut and ARRI log C for the primaries and the gamma. We just need to give it these inputs by adding one more corrector node from the right-click menu, then making use of the color space transform node, or effect rather. Let me rename it first. CST for the color space transform, log, because we are converting to logarithmic. So we need to give it Rec 709 and linear for the inputs, and then prepare, what was it? Yeah, RE White Gamut 3 for the primaries, which is just another way of saying color space, and RE Log C3 for the gamma. Then the tone mapping should be turned off completely for it to work properly. Otherwise the colors will get skewed. No OTF checkboxes are needed as well. Then we should basically have a solid AGX look ready, which won't match the Blender's AGX perfectly. It's a slightly different thing, let's put it like that. It will have the slightly lifted shadows compared to Blender's AGX and some other minor differences, but it's pretty close, and it's good by itself. That's how AGX looks in Blender, by the way, if you want to see quick comparison. And that's how it reacts to changing the exposure. As you can see, yeah, it's slightly different as for the contrast levels, maybe the hues as well, but that isn't something to worry about too much. It isn't like it should match Blender perfectly, but if you want to have a closer match with what we have in Blender, the default Blender's AGX, I mean, the way we can do that is by interjecting a corrector node in between these two, and then making a few adjustments to the contrast levels. That'll be our grade or adjustment. Then we can crunch the lift slider to lower that floor to make the shadowy areas slightly darker, and increase the gamma ever so slightly, and maybe reduce the gain a touch. The difference is mostly in the toe, in the lift, and as soon as we push down the shadows and expand the mid-tones, it pretty much lines up visually with the Blender's AGX contrast levels, at least for the most part. Again, not that it's something that you must do, but I guess it's still good to know how to make this particular DCTL match the Blender's look in a closer way when needed. That isn't necessary though. I think it's best to treat it as a good separate rendering transform or view transform. Okay, I'll disable that extra grade by simply clicking the node. Alright. Another setting that could influence the look of this DCTL is the working log encoding. That changes the overall contrast and also affects how much lift there is in the shadows. DaVinci Intermediate pushes it somewhat closer to the Blender's AGX look, in my opinion. Okay, then in this kind of a setup, the exposure adjustment needs to come first in the chain before the log conversion. Like that. Exposure. As a quick reminder, adjusting exposure is as simple as adjusting the gain in the color wheels. So that was the DCTL setup for the Jed Smith's and Juan Pablo Zambrano's AGX in the studio version of Resolve. Worth mentioning again. A lovely thing about custom DCTLs is the extra controls you get. The stuff and the level of control that simply isn't available in Blender. Like the choice of the output transfer function and of course the sliders. To control such color nuance as the attenuation rate for the individual channels and stuff, which gives some cool extra flexibility in forging the overall look. Or let's say something like the hue of light parameter, which affects which way certain color bands hue shifts in the higher exposures, towards purple or towards yellow, you know, that kind of color skew happening. Purity is another interesting one, which controls how strong and brilliant, or one might say laser-like, are the primary colors, red, green and blue. It's fairly easy to break something up by going too far with nudging certain sliders though, so it should be used with caution. And then in the case of this particular DCTL, there are some contrast adjustments, the icing on the cake really. That's the kind of things the DCTLs can do to help shape the look of a render transform, or let's say shape the way it renders colors on screen. There's no guarantee you'd ever need to go that deep in adjusting it though. One could argue that it is a bit of an overkill and can be substituted by the default color adjustments in Resolve, yet my take on that is that this level of control is super useful to have. I think I'm gonna mention the working log setting once more. It has a pretty big effect on shaping the contrast levels. Feel free to try these various options to see whether it makes this AGX interpretation look closer to your artistic intent or not. Like Canon log creating this kind of a vintage fade in the lower end compared to something like DaVinci Intermediate, which looks arguably cleaner and more modern, I guess. So that's the flavoring you can bring to AGX with the help of this DCTL and its extra controls. Coffee. There are some other cool DCTLs which can do AGX view transform, not limited to, but for instance like AGX by Juan Pablo Zambrano, JP AGX DRT. It can be downloaded from Juan's GitHub, alongside some other honestly amazing DCTLs, which I totally recommend trying as well. Like 2499 DCTL and others. Very good stuff. The whole collection can be downloaded as zip, then installed into Resolve. Actually, the folder with the DCTLs can also be accessed from the project settings color management menu. Just click Open LUT folder, and maybe it's a good idea to make a special folder for it and paste everything there, like what I did with these extra DCTLs. After installing it like that, all of these DCTLs should appear in that list in Resolve. Okay, let me get back. So the Juan's version of AGX is called JP AGX DRT. In a nutshell, it's the AGX that matches the Blender's Eerie Cho AGX really close, with some extra features on top. Like the previous DCTL that we used, it expects certain inputs, Sony S-Gamut and so on. So it's a good idea to give it these exact inputs via the color space transform effect. Sony S-Gamut 3 and Sony, what was it? S-Log 3. Actually, let me check. Oh no, it was S-Gamut 3 Cine. Sign? How do you pronounce it? AD will probably taser me for it, you know, pronunciation police. Oh yeah, never mind, it's most likely Cine, like Vinny. Oh gosh. Anyway, that's AGX for you. It just works and is super easy to set up in Resolve. And has some extra features like this flourish checkbox that kind of spreads out the hues in the highlights, and the black and white mode, which is always welcome. And also a pretty cool contrast switch that lets you choose between low and high, where high creates this almost print-like contrast effect, which you may or may not like, really. But it's good to have, I guess. The flourish one though, let's take one more look at what it does. Let's take something really colorful like this nebula shot. Can you see that? It definitely does something to the highlights. It gives a bit different rendition of colors in these areas. I think it can be put like that. Actually, maybe it can be seen clearly in the higher contrast mode, so why don't we try it out? I think that's a good example of a neat little feature that a DCTL plugin can rock in addition to the basic view transform. Flourish and no flourish. In addition to AGX, there are some other cool free DCTLs emulating other view transforms. It doesn't boil down to AGX only. We can go for something like 2499 view transform, for instance, which is another awesome DRT by Juan Pablo Zambrano. Then again, the inputs in this one are expected to be the DaVinci White Gamut, DaVinci Intermediate by default. So the same pair should be set in the CST node, or rather effect. 2499 gives off a bit more luscious rendering of colors, a bit more rich and dense and vivid, I guess. Depending on your artistic goal, that could be a valid artistic choice in your circumstances. It could be more fitting than the fast attenuation of AGX. Who knows? It is totally up to you. Then again, DCTLs often feature some pretty cool extras like the slider for whatever, for density, making colors more or less rich in tone. Some pretty cool stuff like rotating the hue in the midtones without ruining the luminosity ratios. And the same thing but for the highlights as well. You see some pretty cool control. And finally, the purity control similar to that first AGX DCTL we've taken a look at. Maybe slightly less destructive. If anything, I encourage you to try it yourself. Different DCTLs, I mean, with different rendering transforms, as this difference between DRTs can be quite evasive, but on the other hand quite palpable, especially once you start playing with the sliders. Absolutely, go ahead, give it a spin if you have a key from the Resolve Studio. These custom DCTLs are gold. That all being said, the look of any display rendering transform should not be, how should I say it, absolutized. It's not necessarily about the look as such. The purpose of a DRT is to provide a solid basis for picture formation, not necessarily to offer a particular creative flavor or look. That's what color grading tools are for. So if we abstract away from AGX for a moment, the Resolve's built-in color space transform actually does the job of avoiding clipping and oversaturation pretty well. To give you an example, here we have a logarithmic encoding, DaVinci Wide Gamut and DaVinci Intermediate. That's a necessary step to convert the EXR footage to log, and then we can simply use another color space transform to convert that log into the display space, which is Rec 709 primaries, or color space, and Gamma 2.2 or 2.4 to target an average consumer monitor. Then the Resolve's DRT is actually called tone mapping. For instance, the DaVinci tone mapping. It's like, it's the equivalent of AGX, filmic and so on. It's the Resolve's DRT or view transform, so to speak. There are also some extra settings affecting this view transform like saturation compression that could be used to mimic some of that stronger attenuation of colors that AGX has. So that is the built-in Resolve's DRT, and it is already looking very much like AGX to me at least. The way that the highlights got slightly desaturated and just the overall look, especially in more or less neutral tones, it is in fact super close to that AGX response to light, the film emulsion-like response if you wish. I bet I would have a hard time telling what is what in a blind test. And that's the default. I emphasize the built-in view transform available in the free version of DaVinci Resolve. Just to give you a slightly different and potentially challenging perspective on whether or not you absolutely need AGX to begin with. To make you doubt. Don't get me wrong, AGX still handles extreme saturation in a more elegant way, in a more robust way. And arguably it handles a neon blue light better than the Resolve's DaVinci DRT for that matter too. But even then, all these things considered, surprise, Resolve has all kind of tools for setting up intricate color behaviors. Like if we smuggle in a corrector node before the display transform, let's see, we can do a lot of things with it. Let's say we want to emulate that stronger highlights desaturation of AGX. Then we can simply, jump into the luminance versus saturation curve or something like that in the Resolve's color tab and drop the higher end of it, so the brighter tones get progressively less saturated. And that would do the trick. Then we can maybe compensate some saturation in the lower end to retain some richness in colors. So that's what we can do with the standard Resolve tools. And it's pretty easy to make it look like AGX from that standpoint. Don't get me wrong, that's not the same math that happens within the AGX code, but I just want to get that message across, I guess, that any particular view transform, be it AGX or whatever, shouldn't be mistaken for a look or absolutized for its magical qualities. Along the same lines, the color density thing of certain DRTs can be emulated up to a point by using, for instance, the density sliders in the color slice tab that I will show in a moment. For now, let me reset this grade by right-clicking and selecting Reset Node Grade. As a quick reminder, making the color more dense, meaning making it essentially slightly darker, like adding a thicker layer of paint. That sort of shenanigans can certainly be tackled by a color slice and other tools of Resolve, like by adjusting the density. Even setting a fairly targeted color rules, like adding a lot of density and weight to reds and reds only, it all can be done pretty easily. Or on the other hand, keeping this part of the color spectrum watered down. Or doing something precisely to the yellows, or to some other part of the spectrum, to the blues, for instance. After all, Resolve is precisely the tool for this kind of a job. I mean, the color panel of it. So some color lifting can certainly be done not in the view transform directly, but simply using the standard Resolve tools. That's what I think needs to be emphasized. So there's one more super exciting free method of trying AJAX and many other DRTs straight in Resolve, and that is by using LUTs, or lookup tables. Thanks to Joe Genko, the creator of Pixel Manager, that is one OSIO configuration to rule them all, we now have a pack of LUTs baked from various view transforms including AJAX, Filmic and more, available to you. This Blender to Resolve series is based purely on your donations, so you can get this LUT pack on our Gumroad page by donating any amount that feels right to you, like $49.99 or just one, or 0, my god, or 30, you know, whatever feels good to you. So go ahead and grab this pack of the LUT files with the most popular view transforms on our Gumroad. Essentially what a LUT file contains is the color space transform instruction as for how to convert oranges to apples, or one color space to another. In practice it works like this. Here's a quick guide for using LUT pack, I guess. Well, okay, we need to have the LUT tab open first of all to see all the LUTs we have in Resolve. And let me shape the UI so we have a bit more space. So here we have all the LUTs. To install the new ones, we can right-click any folder, open it in the file browser and paste all the freshly downloaded LUTs into some folder that we create. And that should do it. Alternatively, you can go File, Project Settings, over here, then Color Management, and access the LUT folder from there. Here, for instance, I've pasted these LUTs into the Genko Pixel Manager 2 folder. Just don't forget to hit Update Lists after you've finished installing new LUTs. The way it works is that first we need to convert our EXRs to ARRI-Log C4, ARRI Wide Gamut 4 color space, as it what this LUT pack expects as inputs. For that we can either use this file, LinearRec709 to ARRI, which comes with the pack, or if you fancy using color space transform of Resolve, then it's also fine. Just convert LinearRec709 to ARRI-Log C4, ARRI Wide Gamut 4. That's the inputs that we used for baking this LUT. ARRI Wide Gamut 4, ARRI-Log C4. And don't forget to switch off the tone mapping. That should prepare the footage for taking these LUTs properly. But actually, if you don't want to set it up every time like that, this preliminary step, then feel free to use the provided LUT instead. So I'm gonna delete these color space transform and apply this provided LUT instead. Swoosh. And it should convert it to log, to ARRI-Log. Nice. Next, I'll just add the second corrector node, plug it in, and this one will be the actual display rendering transform or view transform. By the way, you can tell that any node is actually holding the LUT by hovering the cursor over the bottom part of that node rectangle, over the tiny grid icon. Okay, now we should be good to go with any of these view transforms, which by the way will match whatever target is perfectly. Pretty cool, right? Like, do you want AGX from Blender? There's a LUT for that, so no problem. Just click and drag onto this second one. Done. That's the Blender's AGX. Now we just need the exposure control, and that would complete the setup more or less. Okay, so let me add one more node. Plug it before everything else. And this will be our exposure. You can see it just works. Even though these LUTs aren't technically as precise as other methods discussed, it's still quite enough to get the basic tonal response right, and all that stuff, and chances are you won't even notice the difference on an 8-bit monitor anyway. Again, this icon means that this node holds a LUT, basically. Now feel free to try them all. AGX, Kraken, various alterations, like Kraken Punchy. Kraken is the original TroySabotka's take on AGX, by the way. Then there's the Resolves AGX, which is the one that we showed earlier when using the first DCTL in this video. That's the one this LUT recreates. And yeah, feel free to try anything else, like OpenDRT, which is another great one, and whatnot. I hope this little pack of LUTs will be useful to you, packaged like that for your convenience. If you haven't heard about some of these beyond AGX and Filmic, certainly give it a try. The sponsor of the LUT pack bundled with this Blender to Resolve series is Joe Genko, creator of Pixel Manager OCIO config. Just by replacing one simple file in Blender's color management folder, you can unlock the potential of OpenColor.io, which comes bundled with Blender already. In other words, if you want to experiment with all the view transforms available to humanity right in Blender, or in Resolve for that matter, check the free OCIO configuration by Joe Genko. It's called Pixel Manager. Thanks for watching, that was Gleb Alexandrov for CreativeShrimp.com. Hopefully this video was sufficient to get you up and running with setting up AGX and other free cool DRTs in DaVinci Resolve. Let us know what you think about these methods and generally about the Blender to Resolve workflow that we explain in this series of videos. And obviously, if you wish to learn more, visit CreativeShrimp.com. Thank you so much and see you!